Hi, my name is Jacob Swenson-Lingell, and I'm a member of the Organizing Upgrade Editorial Collective. And I'm here today with James Haslam, the Executive Director of Rights and Democracy. They're a grassroots organization based in Vermont and New Hampshire. And they just recently endorsed Bernie Sanders for president. And James authored an article talking about Sanders as a movement candidate that we need. So thanks so much for taking the time to speak with Organizing Upgrade today, James. We're glad you're here.
Great to be here.
I was thinking maybe we could just start, for folks who aren't familiar with Rights and Democracy, could you just tell us a little bit about how the organization got started and about the communities and issues you work with and engage on?
Absolutely, yeah. So we are in both New Hampshire and Vermont. We got started in the second half of 2015. And it's a grassroots, multi-issue organization. We really, see ourselves as, building people power in our communities to advance justice in the ways that are so interconnected between economic justice, racial justice, environmental justice, education justice, healthcare justice, gender justice, so on. We see it all as interconnected, and really do see, building political power to be critical to be able to advance human rights and really have a real democracy. So it's been a blur, to have an organization like Rights and Democracy start in 2015 and be in the Trump era has been, been responding to a lot of things in our communities, really joining the resistance, but really, especially in the last couple of years, we feel like, we're starting to build chapters across, both New Hampshire and Vermont, and build stronger movement. Members from our organization and from our communities that are impacted by these crises are starting to run for local office and state representative and so on, and we really see the need to have our local movements be connected to a national movement. So we're members of both People's Action and the Center for Popular Democracy, and very excited, Center for Popular Democracy Action, and excited about the movement that's growing across the country.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And yeah, I've heard of some of your candidates who've been propelled to victory over the last couple of years. So yeah, it's cool to see the organization growing. So why don't we dig in and talk a little bit about the endorsement. So you all endorsed Senator Bernie Sanders for president. It sounds like 63% of the members cast a ballot for Sanders, the first place ballot for Sanders in the ranked choice ballot process that you led, but also that it sounds like Senator Elizabeth Warren was a close second. And I know that you talked about that in your piece and in the formal endorsement that you issued. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, based on the process that you all went through at RAD, what did you all see as the key differences between Warren and Sanders, and what really stood out to you about Sanders that led to him being a first choice for you all?
Yeah, no, great question. And, it's been a kind of a crazy period for us, being in New Hampshire during this incredibly crowded and competitive primary, where the candidates are literally in our communities pretty much every weekend now. We have, our members have a lot of access in New Hampshire to the candidates. Sometimes come into their living rooms. So it's a very interesting, situation. We went into this process, wanting to have a fully democratic way for all of our members to be able to vote on this. And that just taken a lot of time to, really try to set up something that people could really own and feel good about. We did have one of the choices being people could choose that we should not make any endorsement. And there's some people that voice that because of all the candidates in the field, and particularly because of the high stakes in this election. Obviously, people are terrified about what another 4 years of Trump could mean for this country and the future of the world. So, going into that, we wanted to give that option. And we also wanted to make sure that we only endorsed in a situation where there was overwhelming support. We didn't think there was any use of doing it if we were very deeply divided. So that's one of the reasons why we use the ranked choice voting, so we could get a good picture on where people stood. So yeah, close to 64% picked Sanders first as their first choice. And then about a quarter selected Warren as their first choice. So it was a clear difference, but also, the third choice wasn't even close. It was, really crystal clear that our members were united behind Sanders, but also like Warren quite a bit. And 78% of the people, said that they would support her, in overall. So we felt good about, being able to say those results, that we can endorse Sanders, but that we also thought Warren was a very important second choice that our people would, gladly support in the general election. And that, we would go into this effort in such a way, because we really believe it makes sense for us to, unite progressives, unite our communities as much as possible, and stay united instead of, getting divided in this process.
That's great. Are there particular things that really came up that you think differentiated Sanders and kind of made you all decide that he was really a top choice for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, in this case, we really just let our members vote.
Okay.
In the piece I wrote, for me, I put some of the reasons why I thought, and I think that, most likely were issues that resonated with lots of our members. The thing is, being able to have worked with Senator Sanders, now for close to a little over 20 years, he is not a typical politician, and really, in terms of our movements, organizing for economic justice and a labor movement, and building a social justice movement, standing up against the fossil fuel industry, and trying to take bold action to stop the destruction of the life support systems on the planet, the inequality and, the rise of the billionaire class and their stranglehold on our democracy, all of those issues. Bernie has been working with us in our communities to organize around for as long as I've been organizing. He's been doing it for decades in the state as really kind of a co-organizer. He's held town halls all across the state around the need for universal health care and a just economy, and would invite members of grassroots organizations to speak and testify about, what they're experiencing and the impacts of like a broken healthcare system on their families, but also, encourage people to sign up and join grassroots movements. Every time there was a labor struggle in Vermont, it still is, he's been at the picket lines, sending letters to workers that are thinking about joining a union, saying he supports the union, and that if he was, if he worked there, that he would vote for the union. Really trying to help people build power, because I think he shares our view of a democracy as being much bigger than elections, about having organized people be able to take action together. And I think that mattered for a lot of our folks.
Yeah, that makes sense. In your piece, you talk about Sanders as really being a movement candidate, and that's what you were just speaking to too. And I think the other thing that organizers that I've been talking with a lot are talking about is this question of co-governance, which I think you're speaking to part of that in terms of Sanders encouraging people to join grassroots campaigns, showing up on the picket lines, and also welcoming people to discuss legislation. I'm curious though about like the legislative process and how, if you have experience either at RAD or at your organizing work before that, about what it's been like in terms of the legislative engagement, and whether you've been able to work with his staff on issues around passing legislation or crafting legislation, what that might have looked like with Sanders.
Yeah, I think, to some extent, I've had direct experience with him at various levels, asking them to take stronger positions or to take a position on something that we were fighting for, and partnering on it. Obviously, a lot of our work has been at a state level, and most of his work in recent years has been on a federal level. So we haven't had the same kind of opportunities to co-govern as we do with like our members that are in the state house and so on. But Yeah, I mean, I think to a large degree, and what I've seen not only with our organizations but with other our peer organizations across the country since he started running for president in 2016, and looking at his policies now. I mean, I do my own belief is that their campaign has really worked hard to try to learn with movements, listen to movements, and articulate their platform as a movement platform. I think, across the board, I've been very impressed with how they've taken, strong stances. Their recent immigration policy, for instance, I think is coming out of movements. A lot of their housing policy and the Green New Deal and housing proposal that just recently came out with AOC. These are coming out of our movements, and I think that's what our concept of co-governing means. Is that it's a collaborative process with champion candidates and elected officials, with movements, and I think that's what we're seeing. The other piece of this, though, that I think is really important, I guess, coming out of the labor movement, I think of when workers go to try to fight for their own policies in a contract, we have to have good proposals to be in that contract. We have to have things that meet our needs in those policies. But a lot of winning those policies are so much more than what we actually put in our proposals. It's a power struggle for these policies, and I think that's the piece that for me really crystallizes why Bernie is a movement candidate, because he fundamentally understands that this is a power struggle, and so his whole political career has been taking on the political establishment, not with just smart policies, but with trying to build a groundswell of public support to create a mandate around those policies. And I think that's the biggest piece for me.
Yeah, that makes sense, and something we're hearing from a lot of folks. I guess related to this question of interacting with movements, you're talking about how Sanders really has shaped his program in conversation with a lot of the movements that have come up. Sanders has come under some criticism from left organizers, especially around race, and you mentioned immigration too. And in some ways, we've seen the campaign shift in response to that criticism. How do you think about that, or did you see members kind of grappling with that? And especially given your access to people like Sanders and Warren, how have you been able to kind of talk to candidates about potential weaknesses or areas where you think their campaigns or platforms or approaches could be strengthened?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bernie has been responding in a healthy way, since some of the criticism going back to the early part of 2016 when he launched his campaign. I think in hindsight, he would do it differently. Certainly, the advice from organizers that have, communicated with his campaign, I think has been heard. That centering the racist history and how structural racism is so deeply embedded with all of our struggles, and centering that from the beginning, undoubtedly would have been a better position to have taken, the right position to take. And I think, it, and unfortunately, took some time to get that to be more a critical centerpiece of his campaign. But I think now, if you look at the positions and you look at the people who are building this political revolution, with this campaign, it is super exciting to think about the transformation that I think this campaign embodies and reflects in our movements of what this country could become. And I think for our members, like the people that our members get most excited about, frankly, are some of like the squad, right? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. I mean, like those young congresswomen are, I think, a reflection of other movement candidates that are co-governing with movements and are part of this. And I think it's important that they're just as much as part of this political revolution as Senator Sanders is. And I think that tension with movements and elected officials and learning together and accountability to movements for people who put themselves out as movement candidates is really critical. So we should always go in with open eyes. No candidate is going to be perfect and agree with us all the time. And this is just part of what democracy looks like, is holding those folks' feet to the fire, getting, if they're going to say they're the movement candidate, let's use that as an opportunity to make them, as good as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to the process thing a little bit. It's really exciting to hear how you created this democratic framework to engage your members around this and really try and create a participatory process that was that created unity, but also landed on making an endorsement, which is really exciting and important as well. I'm wondering if there's, you talked a little bit about the challenges of having two front runners, but I'm wondering if there's things that you'd want to say to other organizations that are out there thinking about making an endorsement, about why it's important to make an endorsement, any advice you have to offer about how to manage the process that people who are maybe endorsing for the first time are thinking about the challenges of working with members who support different candidates. Is there anything you'd impart to those folks about why to do it or how to do it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's hard. I mean, I won't lie, democracy is work, right? Yeah, we have to spend the time to have the meetings, to plan, with our folks, how to run these things and not have it be a process that, a couple of staff people are creating without any input and so on. So, we put a lot of work into creating the space for our members to really develop a process that they could own and they could feel good about. Where it landed, I feel proud of. I mean, it was ranked choice voting, which I would recommend, especially in these situations where you're trying to, get a good picture about where people's first choice would be, but also where people think about the other candidates. And then, I think just the idea of having a membership vote, in a lot of cases, this goes to the labor movement and so on, there can be these decisions made by a select few of elected leaders, ideally, but still a small representative of the overall organization. And without some way of getting at least some input, meaningful, transparent input from your membership, it's really a lot of pressure to put on those handful of people. And obviously, if it's a tough decision, which Jenny, a lot of these decisions are tough, then it also, I mean, I know I feel a whole lot better about the fact that we made this decision as an organization, and we can say, this is where our members voted. Doesn't matter what any one of us think. This is a democratic decision. So I just encourage, I guess the two highlights, ranked choice voting if possible, and let your members vote, at least as part of the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, I know you mentioned earlier that Rights and Democracy, you're working with People's Action and Center for Popular Democracy, and also, I'm sure, engaging with other state groups who are thinking about endorsement. Have you been trying to encourage folks to do endorsements, or pulling for and advocating for Sanders? I know there's kind of a community of people who are lining up behind Sanders, but have you been in conversation with other groups who are doing processes about endorsement?
Yeah, I mean, in both networks in particular, I mean, most of our engagement has been with our peers in both of the networks, and in both of them, there's been a robust conversation about this, that has been going on for months, trying to figure out, what makes the most sense, particularly because the stakes are so high. And I think, especially if we look back to 2016, when these two networks and our organization and a lot of the organization that exists right now didn't exist or was in a very formative stage, but if we could go back in time, obviously, given what we know now, and have gone back to 2015 and tried to figure out what we would do to make an impact into 2016, clearly we would do everything we can to intervene, to try to, make sure the country didn't go the direction it did. So, that's the opportunity in front of us now. So I've personally voiced, yeah, I think it is in a democracy. These are fights not to be on the sidelines on, and that we should engage. This particular dynamic, where there's a lot of interest in not only in Senator Sanders but in Senator Warren and Secretary Castro, that it's both a challenge and an opportunity. And to some degree, obviously, it's great and important and ultimately critical that we have multiple progressive voices in this campaign, in this debate. And so the future is not written yet. I'm hoping collectively with our peers around the country, we're going to be able to help unite this movement to not only win the primary, but win the general election. And then most importantly, implement the policies. As the climate strikers will tell us on Friday that are coming out again, right? We don't have all the time in the world to get off this course that this economic and political system is driving us under. And so we're going to have to do our best to do it. So I think, a lot of us are talking about, obviously, Senator Sanders, has been aligned with a lot of movements and other organizations around the country. And those folks are, I think, in discussion. But, we are hoping to figure out how to build as much unity as possible to bring this country together.